Patch 12.10 is the most important and largest patch to come out for League of Legends in the past several years. If you don't know what's going on in this patch, you should watch the rundown. As always, there is a TLDR at the end, so if you don't want a very long rundown, description below, you get a 5-minute version of this one. This is a pretty big deal. I am Phreak. Let's talk about the fact that 12.10 is the durability update. Yes, I'm aware that we are 7 days out on this one. I was in Germany for the Mid-Season Invitational. Good job, RNG, on winning your third title. This is probably not going to be, as you can tell from the video length down there, this is not going to be a 7-hour dissertation. I simplified to the extent that felt reasonable to me. So let's talk about what's going on here. So there was, by the way, a micro patch that went out like 24 or 48 hours after the patch went live to basically bring up champions who got really, really, really skewed and bring down champions who got really, really, really overbuffed. I have not really checked in on how those buffs have done. Also, this patch rundown is not covering these specific details either, because this is about the durability update overall and how to win with that change going on. So yes, there were about a dozen changes overall. Okay, wonderful. Let's talk about the fact that Grievous wounds got nerfed overall, shields generally got nerfed, heals generally got nerfed, vamp generally got nerfed, because champions gained a bunch of armor and magic resist, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but functionally amplifies a lot of these stats. But also champions gained a whole lot of health. The single biggest change in this patch is the base health and health growth adjustment. That's going to do most of the heavy lifting, and we saw that ended up being true when we looked at the champions who gained a lot of win rate and the champions who got micro patch nerfed as well. So let's talk about what's going on here. Okay. Every champion, again, gained 70 base health and 14 health growth. Keep in mind that that's going to end up being 200 or so health to every champion. So think about every 5 levels, you're going to gain another 70 health functionally. So, 70 base plus another 15 level ups to get to level 16. And you're looking at, 280-ish, almost 300 by the very end of the game, extra health. That is obviously very, very substantial. The 70 base health is also very substantial. And it means we are sort of in a world of about 15% more health just across champion. It's like roughly true. 12 to 15% for almost all champions of the game. That's a lot of durability. Armor and MR only gained as growth stats. So they did not get gained at level 1. So a level 1 champion gained 70 health and then nothing else. And then by level 18, they gained 300 health and like 20 armor and like 15 magic resist. I'm vaguely just sort of rounding the numbers, but that's kind of what's going to be true. Thresh gets individual changes based on this as well. Okay, great. But worth pointing out that we'll start with healing. Healing got by 10 to 28%. Now that is really, 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 really substantial, because here's an interesting kind of thought. And a lot of this rundown is going to be done at like each line for a while, because what else can we do but talk about the system changes as a large thing. So the overall durability amp from armor and MR is about 0 to 10%. You get about 0 to 10% at level 18 more durable from armor and MR. And that number shrinks the more armor and MR you buy. So for example, a champion like, who's a good example? Leona, I think, is a decent example. Or anyone running Aftershock, or anyone who's going to build tank items like every tank ever, maybe an Ornn. They get even less out of the armor MR gain. But even if you're Renekton and you don't really buy durability very much, like maybe buy Death Stance, but whatever, like you take 10% less damage. You take 0% less damage at level 1, by the way, and you take 10% less damage at level 18, but your healing is down by 28%, so your healing doesn't remotely keep up. If it's been nerfed by this degree. So this was a very, 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 very large healing nerf. Now, that said, if the call is, well, champs are getting bursted before they're able to heal, which I want to be clear, is actually a reasonable statement to make, where the healing was 0, and now the healing is 80% of what it was before, I can actually buy that. Now, I don't think it's true in every single case. A champ like Renekton is going to get his heal off. A champion like... Dr. Mundo is going to get his healing off. A champion like Janna may not get her whole ult healing off, because it's a heal over time. She presses R, and the champion finished dying before she finished healing them. That's a totally reasonable thing to think about here, right? That is definitely possible. Now, of course, this is not just being done because of the armor MR changes. It's being done because Grievous wounds is getting nerfed, right? And so Grievous Wounds goes from cutting your healing by 40% to cutting it by 30%. Enhanced Grievous Wounds goes from cutting by 60 to cutting by 55% or 50%. So the healing cut, the healing nerf is not because of the armor MR change, although it is partially, considering that shielding and Omnivamp went down by about 10%. It's that, well, they also nerfed Grievous Wounds. So they increased durability, they nerfed Grievous Wounds, nerfed healing, and then nerfed shielding and Omnivamp roughly as much of this stuff going on. And I want to point out again that if Omnivamp only got nerfed by 10%, if there weren't Grievous Wounds changes, then Omnivamp got slightly over nerfed. And healing got heavily over nerfed. Because there are Grievous Wounds changes, healing is similar-ish, and Omnivamp is just stronger. Like, the set of these changes buffs Omnivamp. In a world where you assume Grievous Wounds is actually commonly in the game, yeah, shielding, very lightly nerfed. Omnivamp as a whole, very lightly buffed. Healing as a whole, probably relatively flat. And I will be honest, I didn't do this analysis. There might be a point in this video where I will pause and do it anyway. But as I'm recording right now live, I do not have an in-depth analysis on healing cut versus Grievous Wounds cut. Not really. I have something that's like kind of flawed here, but we can talk about that. Okay, and we can. It'll be a little bit useful. And then some proactive extended combat nerfs, so nerfing things like Sunfire, Moonstone, Demonic, and Conditioning, where things that were ostensibly good in very, very long combats are getting preemptively nerfed. I will point out that Demonic Embrace is the one I did the analysis on. It is actually still buffed for melee champions and overall nerfed for ranged champions, so I think more care could have been taken in these changes, but we'll talk about it when we get to the champions specifically. Okay, so basically every single champion in the game got changes via the fact that a lot of champions got their healing cut down. So for example, 10% less healing on the E, and then around, just over 10% less healing at rank 5 of the E. The R empowered version, of course, rank 1 E is there for rank 1 ult, don't get me wrong. And then again, down by about 10% or a little bit less than 10% here. The increased self-healing, which is then going to multiply against everything else, is down by 5 percentage points. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of in line. And again, I'm not really going to go through all of these. We're going to skip through pretty much all of these because there's not much, there's not a lot of value in saying, yep, it's about 10% in a lot of these cases. And we're just going to move on. Okay, so Grievous Wounds got cut down, and I believe, sorry. So as far as the actual durability gains, we're going to start on those because I have a bunch of charts, and so we'll talk about this. So this is Ezreal's total physical and magical durability before and after the patch. This is how much physical damage he can receive before dying. Here's how much magic damage he can receive before dying. And this is counting for health. This is counting for the armor. This is counting for the magic resist. And so this is going to be actually how much more durable are champions. Now, there's an interesting thought here. So not all champions, in fact, most champions, do not have flat DPS at all points in time. No duh. Right? So if you're Malzahar, you're casting 4 spells kind of as fast as possible, and then those are your cooldowns, and they either die or they didn't, and then maybe they'll die to your second wave of cooldowns. Maybe they did or they didn't. But getting 20% more health, or 20% more, or in this case, master damage, so 90% more total durability at level 8 means, maybe you just didn't one combo them, and so they go from dying in 4 seconds to dying in 12 seconds. Whereas if you're Vayne, for example, well, I might kill you in auto 3, auto 6, auto 9, auto 12, but it's like relatively flat. So instead of it being auto, 9, it was auto 12. They lived for 1/3 longer. Yeah, sure, right? That's roughly accurate. And there's going to be a lot of cases where if we're doing this whole rounding thing, they might have just died on the 9th auto anyway. Which I think makes sense overall. I'd also keep in mind that Vayne does percent health true damage, so she actually just ignores a lot of this in the first place. And unsurprisingly, was one of the champions who was buffed in this patch, and then was micropatch nerfed. But basically, this is to say that these numbers are still fair. You are still 13 to 28% more durable, and that is just an accurate statement. That is just true. But the way to unwind that is, if you are a really consistent DPS champion, like maybe a Callista or a Vayne or, even like a Draven, just kind of autos, they will just actually live 20% longer, 18% longer, 25% longer, and that's going to be pretty fair and pretty accurate. If you're a burst mage, there's an increased chance that you will not one-shot them. There are still worlds where you kill them the exact same amount of time because your full combo still kills them. That's a possibility. But there are also going to be cases where they will die in twice as long because you missed the burst window and have to try again. That is also a possibility, and so that's something that you have to kind of think about. We're going to drag this out so that it's a bit easier to read the text. Okay. Also, it's going to be worth noting that as we move forward, this data table for Ezreal is going to be really, 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 really similar to every other champion in the game. There really aren't a lot of hugely distinct and very different base stat packages. Ultimately, it's actually not that big of a change, no matter who you pick. So 13 to 28 for Ezreal, very similar numbers with magic damage. Darius is 12 to 25. Yeah, 1 percentage point here, 3 percentage points here. Like, there is technically a difference. And then 12 to 27 because melee champions, baseline already had more MR than ranged champions. So the MR, you're going to see a bigger distinct difference where instead of 13 to 27, it's 12 to 24. But again, it's the same, 1 to 3 percentage points difference. So yes, melee champions got buffed a little bit less than ranged champions did, but there's a compelling case to be made that melee champions have to close the gap into melee range before dying. And so a 10% durability amp to a melee champion could mean more than a 10% durability bump to a ranged champion. That is, I think, a reasonable argument to make that even though percentage point wise, it is less good for Darius than Ezreal, in actual functionality, Ezreal isn't using the durability amp in any way because if he's caught, he's caught. And if he's not, who cares what his health is? Whereas Darius actually must use his health bar to accomplish anything. And so ostensibly, I think you could just make the case that melee champions actually got buffed here and ranged champions, a lot of the cases didn't, especially if we get out of an assassin meta, then you didn't need it anyway. But just to make other couple of comparisons, so Ezreal was the most commonly picked bot laner. Darius is the most commonly picked top laner. Viego is the most commonly picked melee champion. You can see that Viego didn't have quite the same suite of juggernaut stats that Darius did, right? So 12 to 25%, but Viego's health is a lot lower, so it's 17 to 27%. MR identical to Darius, but again, his health is lower, so it gets a 5 percentage point amp at level 1 because of substantially less health, and relatively flattens out by endgame. We look at Yasuo as the most commonly picked mid laner. Again, has, I believe, ranged champion MR 30 to 26%. Not a big surprise there. Health total relatively low. Actually, let me check something. Did I do something wrong with the math here? I may have done something wrong with the math here. I'm not sure. Either way, it doesn't really matter. The point still stands that these numbers are going to be relatively accurate, and that's good enough for our purposes, basically. Just doing one thing to look at the numbers again. Oh yeah, this got buffed by way too much health somehow. So I don't know. Oh no, never mind. I don't know. It is what it is. I don't really care. We're gonna move on because the 13 to 25% sort of function is going to be true with all champions, and so it doesn't really matter if there's some errors somewhere because it's still going to line up in a very similar case. We're going to look down at a support tank like Nautilus. So many melee supports have incredibly high base armor. That's just kind of what happened when Riot did some base stat compensation 4 years ago. Supports gained a ton of armor. So they get a little bit comparatively less help out of the armor department, which you're going to see, only grow to 27% or so here. Right, less than the Viego got, for example. Magic ability, again, ranged champion, very similar numbers here. Lux is the most common range support, gains a lot from the armor growth because she has very low armor, so 29% more physical damage taken before dying. And then Ahri also has incredibly low base armor. I think it's around 18, so she gets 30% more overall durability gained from armor, which is the highest, I think, of any champion outside of Yuumi, but that doesn't really matter because no one actually fights Yuumi directly. So your top end here is actually 30% more physical damage taken. If you're a champion with very low armor, normally you get a lot out of armor growth, which should surprise almost no one. If you have very low health, she used to have I think around 500, maybe even a little bit lower. So getting 70 health is pretty meaningful there. Okay, great. So again, there's the numbers we're looking at, right? We're looking at 50. We're looking at 12 to 30% durability. 12 to 17% at level 1, 25 to 30% at level 18. Those numbers also work for armor as well as MR. That's kind of the world we're living in, right? That's how durable champions are. In terms of I throw damage into you and eventually you die. This is how much longer they're going to live. Okay, and I think that's going to be just accurate in basically all cases, and we can move on from there. This is talking about the healing and shielding amp gained from bonus armor and MR. So this is using Viego and Ahri as my examples. So this is Viego on the left-hand side. This is Ari on the right-hand side. It says, okay, well, I gained this much durability from armor, and I gained this much durability from magic resist. Okay, and again, 0 at level 1, about 10% at level 18, right? This is what I said at the very beginning. That's still true. And so that means that, okay, on average, I have, well, 0 to about 9% more durability. And if I'm Ari, which is very, very low armor, it's like 0 to 11% more durability, lower MR as well. So this is basically using as a function to say, well, if I have some amount of damage coming in, and I'm going to heal against that. Like, let's say there's no other changes, right? There's just armor and MR, and you're auto-attacking me as Ash. Okay, I'm taking damage, and I'm self-healing through, I don't know, Mundo R. That's a weird one because health changed, so let's not think about Mundo too much. I'm going to use Summoner Heal. I'm going to use, Osaka's pressing W on me from the background. Yumi's pressing E, like before any nerfs, before there's any changes at all. I think I can use Renekton Q because that's like a base heal based on just my AD. So how does that change? Well, I take basically 10% less damage, and I'm rounding here. I take 10% less damage, which means my healing is 10% better. This is going to be roughly accurate. And so basically all melee champions got up to 9% more healing and 9% more value of shielding. Now, shielding is a little weird because shields can just decay or drop off without getting popped. So not all shields actually got buffed because many shields just didn't block their full damage, and so it does nothing changed. Shields are balance change resistant in either direction, actually. So again, the point still stands that healing is 0 to 9% better, 0 to 11% better. So again, 0 to 10% better is how much better healing and shielding, and not Omnivamp, because Omnivamp, to my understanding, and any kind of vamp, is based on damage dealt after resists. So if I have more armor and MR, so I take less damage, and I deal less damage to you with armor and MR, Omnivamp didn't change, right? Omnivamp is actually flat. And then also, Grievous wounds got nerfed. So Omnivamp is strictly buffed. And then you have things like Conqueror, if I understand correctly, where right, you have some true damage conversion, and then you heal based on that to some degree. That actually got buffed in the sense that, like, the numbers, right? Like, well, okay, sorry. Let me recompare slightly, right? So before the actual balance changes of Omnivamp does 10% less stuff, I'm dealing less to you, you're dealing less to me. That's neutral, but then Omnivamp got nerfed by 10%. So through that analysis, right, Omnivamp got nerfed by 10%, but doesn't have to interact with Grievous wounds. Shields, through this system's change, got buffed by up to 10%, but got nerfed by Riot by 10%. So should be an overall nerf to shields, unless you're making the case that people were getting burst before they could cast their shield in time, which is maybe possible, I suppose. And that's kind of that math there. I think that all makes sense. Hopefully that all seems correct and aligned, and we can move forward a little bit. So these are a couple of notes that I wanted to kind of jot down for topics I wanted to bring up. I know this is not clean in any way or special, but let's talk about it. So yeah, the absolute value of health and resist is something I want to talk about, which is that I don't care about gold efficiency. So gold efficiency is an okay metric to use when trying to compare two similar items. Hey, what does Satanic Hydra give me? What does Ravenous Hydra give me? What does Kraken Slayer give me? What does Gale Force give me? How much am I really losing here? Oh, okay, Kraken Slayer has 300 more gold worth of stats than a Gale Force. Okay, I can understand that, and then compare 300 gold of stats to a Gale Force active. Like, that is reasonably done gold efficiency calculations. Gold efficiency calculations do not work when telling me what item do I buy in isolation. Gold efficiency is pretty much useless for that. What actually matters is the true value of health and resist. We're just going to like link that up so it's easier to read. And so what that means is if I'm a level 1 champion, I don't have a lot of health. And so a ruby crystal is going to be like a 20% durability bump, which is really, really meaningful, right? But from level 18, ruby crystal's gold efficiency didn't change, but as a durability bump, it went from 20% to under 10%, right? The gold efficiency did not change, but the sort of absolute value or relative value, I know I'm using them interchangeably, which is weird, but I'm going to do that here, kind of got cut by half. The value got cut by half. In terms of how can I live longer the cheapest, well, Ruby Crystal is a much less optimal option. Let's compare to armor. Let's say I have very little armor. I'm level 1, I have 20 armor. A cloth armor is going to give me around like a 13% durability amp, something around there. Which is like not bad, but it's worse than a Ruby Crystal, which was 20%. If I go to level 18 and I have 80 armor, and the Ruby Crystal got cut by more than half. But the cloth armor is still going to be around like an 8 to 9% durability amp. I went from level 1 to level 18 armor, and it went from like 13 to 9%. And I'm like barely rounding here. Whereas health from level 1 to level 18 went from 20% to 9%. And Ruby Crystal costs more. And so in general, the more health you have, the more you should buy armor and MR. And as we just saw in our earlier analyses, we have about 16% more health straight up. We have 0 to 10% more armor and MR in practical terms after the changes, which means that Ruby Crystals got indirectly nerfed. Like they still provide 150 health. The gold efficiency didn't change, but the necessity of buying Ruby Crystal has gone down. The necessity of building armor and MR, cloth armor and Negatron cloak, went down, but by not as much. So we are indeed skewing towards armor and MR more than before. See, it used to be that it was correct not to buy a steel caps or a cloth armor, but to buy Ruby Crystal. In fact, one of the builds I saw a lot in tank versus physical damage matchups was an Ornn would go Bomby Cinder and then the Warden's Mail. Which, like, of course, Bomby Cinder helps you trade back and it helps you wave clear, and that's all very valuable. But also, the Ruby Crystal was better than the cloth armor. So it was correct in terms of like mathematical gameplay terms to health stack and then armor stack. As you gain more levels, armor becomes a better stat to buy, and so you go that way. And so tank builds are actually very, very correct at MSI from what I saw. One final thing to bring up on this topic of health, armor, MR is imagine you're in a Jax mirror match. Yeah, it's a normal blind pick, but it's just like, it's doing this to illustrate the situation that we're in, okay? Let's say we're making things up. Let's say pre-patch, you could spend 4,000 gold on 3 BF swords. I know it's a weird build, but stick with me. Or 4 giant belts. So in one case, I can gain 90 AD. In the other case, I can gain about 1,000 health. Roughly accurate, right? And we're like fighting at level, I don't know, 7 or something. Who cares? And again, I'm making things up. Like, just pretend the numbers work out here, okay? Pretend the numbers work out. Let's say pre-patch, 3 BF swords and 4 giants belts cost the same amount of gold, and they were the same power level. So you fought each other with no items, and it was a draw. Then you fight each other with 3 BF swords and 4 giants belts, and it's a draw, okay? Let's say those things are balanced against one another. Again, we're making things up. I understand that, but let's pretend they're balanced. Okay? Who wins post-patch? The 3 BF swords or the 4 giants belts? Right? And just like, think about it for a second. Who wins post-patch? 3 BF swords or 4 giants belts? Well, the answer is, and let's think about it, right? Like, well, he gained more health, but he also gained more armor and MR. So, like, the value of health is higher because he's got more armor and MR to amplify the health, right? 3 BF swords wins. And the reasoning is very, very simple, okay? So 3 BF swords doubles your DPS, right? Your auto attacks do a lot more damage, your spells do a bit more damage. Your DPS is doubled from 3 BF swords. And in the old patch, 4 giants belts doubled your durability. So my DPS went from 200 to 400, and your health went from 1k to 2k. And so we bash, and we die at the same amount of time. But now, like, even if armor and MR, like, quintupled, and everyone had 500 armor, 500 magic resist, those 4 giant spells would still only double your health, and those 3 BF swords would still double my DPS, and we'd bash, and we'd win at the same amount of time. But because everyone's base health went up by about 16%, I gained double damage for my 3 BF swords, and you gained 90% more health. from 4 Giants belts. And so now I kill you before you kill me. Because I double my DPS, you gain 90% more health. What this means is, if the comparison between buying more damage and buying more durability is close, especially if that item was a health item, you are more likely to pick the durability option. Or sorry. I said that backwards. You're more likely to pick the damage option. If your choices were close between damage and durability, you should be more willing to buy damage now. Which also means, by the way, like a champion like anyone who would like consider building a quasi-damage build like Demonic Embrace, Zac, and Shyvana, not only Demonic Embrace get strictly buffed, but instead of building a Warmogs or instead of building a Frozen Heart or... Okay, Frozen Heart's a weird option because, again, it doesn't have health on it. But instead of building, Anathema's Chains and whatnot that give you some raw health, yes, I know Demonic gives you raw health as well, but, like, damage didn't go down in value. Damage is still 100% efficient. Like, the same thing, by the way, of 4 BF swords versus, like, 8 chain vests. That math also still lines up because, again, 60% more health, but also still 10% more out of armor and MR. If the comparison is BF swords to chain vests, that's also still true. Now, it's less of a severe move. It's more like that, but it's still true. In all cases, buying durability is a bit less valuable. Now, what's interesting is a lot of offensive stats got nerfed as well, and we'll keep going down the rabbit hole. So it's skewed towards armor and MR than before, and skew more towards damage than before. So let's talk about Grievous Wounds changes, okay? So we once again have this built-in amp that we used to have, right? We know from up here that champions have 0 to 10% basically, and that we can do this. This is averaging the averages. So this is averaging everything. This is averaging both those numbers, and we're gonna just forevermore we're gonna say 0 to 10%, okay? That's what I said at the very beginning of the video because I did this math already. 0 to 10% is the durability gained through armor and MR, aka the efficiency of shielding and healing and that. Okay, cool. So we gained this amp via level. Now, it's worth pointing out that the more tank stats you bought, the lower this amp is. If you're someone who bought 130 armor and 130 MR, this 5% is 2.5%. This 10% is 5%. I want to be kind of clear about that, right? But let's talk about the fact that Grievous Wounds got nerfed. And this is the small Grievous, right? 40 becoming 30, and this is big Grievous, 60 becoming 50. That the base stat increase does not make up for the Grievous Wounds nerf. Well, of course not, because direct healing got nerfed and Grievous got nerfed. But it's pointing out that, hey, okay, if you're buying Grievous pre and post patch, Grievous got nerfed by 24 to 17% for small Grievous, right? And it's kind of weird to sort of like talk about this, but so let's say you have an option, right? You have the ability to buy a Blasting Wand or an Oblivion Orb, okay? And a Blasting Wand is going to give you N damage, and an Oblivion Orb is going to give you M damage. Let's go X and Y, okay? Let's say a Blasting Wand increase your outgoing damage by 5%. We're making up a number here. Let's say it's 5%, okay? Which means I'm going to reduce your health bar by 5% more than it was going to be reduced before. Great, we're on the same page here. Or I could buy Grievous Wounds, and the AP is much less. We're going to count it as negligible for now. And what that comes into is, okay, well then how much health am I cutting off of you by cutting your healing? How much were you healing by before? Because before, I could cut your healing by 40%. So, let's say I was doing 1,000 damage, and if I increase my damage by 5%, it's now 1,050. That's Blasting Wand, right? With Oblivion Orb, my damage is 1,000, but how much do you heal? Well, if you heal for 100, I'm cutting that by 40%. I'm cutting it by 40. An Oblivion Orb is worse than Blasting Wand. Again, we're counting this item as 0 AP. Just stick with me for the math's sake. Without changes to anything else, the math gets even worse. Because even though you gain a bunch of armor and MR, so let me spell this out, right? So if you gain, let's do her up here, just for like full sake of comparison, okay? Because I deal 10% less damage to you, I actually don't do 1,000 damage, I do 900 damage. And a 5% damage amp is not 50 damage, but 45 damage. Which means the bar got lower, right? The bar got lower. Now I only have to cut 45 damage. So imagine Grievous wasn't nerfed, right? Okay, if I buy a Blasting Wand, I go from 9k to 9,045. If I buy Oblivion Orb, I go from 9,000 to 9,040. And it got closer. Let's say we bump durability even more. We're doing 8,000 damage. It goes up and goes up and goes up. Okay, well, 5% damage amp is 40 damage. I buy Blasting Wand, I go from 8k to 8k 40. I buy Oblivion Orb, I go from 8k to 8k 40. Let's say that even more armor MR. I go from 7k to 7k 35. Suddenly Oblivion Orb is better than Blasting Wand. And obviously if their healing is higher, whatever, right? So that's the math. That's the comparison, right? Because denied healing is functionally identical to damage. It's true damage. And that's the math that has to happen. That's the comparison. But Oblivion Orb got nerfed really heavily, right? So instead of dealing 40 damage, it deals 30 damage. So the unique passive of Oblivion Orb got nerfed by about 25%, right? Instead of that unique passive saying I provide 40 damage, the unique passive provides 30 damage, which means, the bar has to keep getting lower and lower and lower for this limbo to break it. But as people gain armor and magic resist, right, you can kind of consider Oblivion Orb as actually a 33% healing cut, and it's only a 17% nerf. And through the lens of which one do I buy, well, later game Oblivion Orbs make a little bit more sense, right? And then we can do it as big Grievous wins, right? As Morellonomicon versus, finishing Horizon Focus or whatever. Where again, it used to be 6%, now it's 50%. Okay, fair enough. And so the value of them only went down by 1/6. That's relatively true. In terms of how do I do the most offense, it's only 1/6 worse. In reality, it's actually only, 10% worse. I mean, no one's really buying Morellonomicon at level 6, I'm pretty sure. But like, hey, 13, 15, 18, 19, whatever. Level 19, we're playing Earth, who knows? Okay, it's less bad, right? Like, because everyone gained a bunch of baseline armor and MR, Morellonomicon only got nerfed by 10%. Only. Now, it's worth noting, though, that let's think about this. Okay, so we're going to see fewer Grievous Wounds items because they're not as good, right? Which just innately buffs healing champions because they're not getting cut nearly as much, right? Okay, valuable. And then similarly, well, healing, though, has now gone down because that was the choice. Armor and MR went up. They want to cut down healing because they just want to cut down healing overall. Less healing in the game. Grievous Wounds is going to be less stark as a result. So this was kind of interesting is instead of making the items less good generically, they made them less good at their job, which I don't think is necessarily a problem because there was still a world where a 50% Grievous Wounds change is worth it, right? Like, there's still a world where you want to buy Morellonomicon. There's still a world where you want to buy an Oblivion Orb. No matter what those numbers are, there's going to be a world where you want to buy that. But now, it's only worth it in more extreme cases of healing. Oh, we're against a Soraka Sona lane. That is a lot of healing. It is worth it to buy a 30% healing cut item instead of a pickaxe. But, well, we're against just a Senna. It's not worth it anymore. And that's a totally reasonable way to nerf this. And you could nerf it by nerfing the AP and the AD and the costs on items, or you can nerf it by nerfing the unique passive. And I think both are fine. And what this means is you are never getting more screwed than by half, right? Like, the total worst case for a healer is not absurd, which I think is also, again, very reasonable to be in. Like, well, even if they try to hard counter you through itemization and summoner spells, you still do half your healing, is, I think, a reasonable thing to tell players. And that you say, hey, they heal for a lot, you can cut that by half. This is the max you can do. I think that is also reasonable. So I don't think it's like a design problem or an oversight or a mistake. This is how it happened. Anyway, circling back to it, though, be the fact that a lot of healing got cut by 10 to 28%. Well, how much did this get nerfed? Right? How much did this get nerfed? Because healing got nerfed by 10 to 28%. Grievous Wounds got nerfed by not that. Right? Grievous Wounds got nerfed by... Okay, now Small Grievous got nerfed by about that, right? And in fact, but like, okay, early game healing, even in the face of Oblivion Orb, is actually better than before. And then late game healing, or whenever you've maxed out your healing skill against Small Grievous Wounds, is worse than before, right? Nerf by 28% versus Grievous being nerfed by 20%. Guess which one is more impactful? 28%. So early game healing, in the face of Executioner's, Oblivion Orb, whatever, in a case where someone bought it first item, early game healing got buffed. Late game healing got nerfed. In the case of Morellonomicon, healing just got nerfed. In every in-game situation, healing simply got nerfed. So that's what's going on there, right? Healing got nerfed, like by more than this. With the exception being that there will be fewer Oblivion Orbs and there will be fewer Morellonomicons because healing is worse. So people will go buy better items, right? They will be stronger champions by not buying an Executioner, so buying a pickaxe instead and finishing Kraken Slayer instead. So like it's not like the anti-healing champions got weaker because they can just make a different choice now. And so the healers are, in some cases, going to actually heal for more health because they're not against Morellonomicon. But they've been nerfed and other people just got to buy different items. I hope that all makes sense because ultimately, you still will never know where the equilibrium is. You still won't know where the equilibrium is. And just, if healing feels too high, buy Morellonomicon, buy more Reminder. Alrighty. So that's all the stuff on Grievous Wounds. Because everything went from 40% to 30% or 60 to 50%. Okay? Cool. All right. Next up, we have nerfs to percent penetration. So Void Staff went from 45 to 40. Blade and Jewel went 15 to 13. Lord Dominic's went from 35 to 30. And Last Whisper went from 20 to 18. So I've got a lot of math for that. So once again, we spit back in our old option of our friend Ari. And this says that, hey, you can't just buy a Void Staff and make up for the old changes. Like, people's armor and MR went up, but Void Staff went down, and you don't do more damage than before. So, like, basically, again, champion durability from health went up 16%. Champion durability from armor and MR went up 0 to 10%. Well, the Void Staff nerf against a melee champion like a Diego or a Varius, or a ranged champion like an Ari or a Lux or an Ezreal, are in very, very similar boats here, which shouldn't surprise by very much. But you can see that technically, right, early on, it's probably a weaker item, but against someone without buying any itemization at all, Void Staff probably keeps up. We can look at Blighting Jewel. Blighting Jewel's on a very, very similar boat. You don't make up for the changes. Like, you don't suddenly deal more damage than pre-patch. But because you are bringing in percent penetration, you're pretty much holding up. At least a little bit, right? And we'll talk more about this later, but it's to say that you can't just like ignore the durability changes because you bought a Void Staff. That's what's happening here, okay? We look at Sork Shoes, and it's worth noting that Sork Shoes, of course, got indirectly nerfed, not just directly nerfed, like, because Void Staff got directly nerfed and indirectly buffed because there's more armor and MR in the game. Sork Shoes got indirectly nerfed because there's more armor and MR in the game. So what does this mean? Well, Sork Shoes is a weaker item. Straight up, right? Sork Shoes is a weaker item. These champions have, even after Void Staff, especially after Void Staff in some cases, have more armor and MR than before. And even without Void Staff, they have more armor and MR than before. And lo and behold, Sork Shoes is a weaker item. Now, it's really, really close early game. If you still want to do burst damage, it's probably still pretty good for that one. But the total MR values are higher than before the patch. Okay, so let's talk about Void Staff versus Sork Shoes against melee and ranged champions pre and post patch. Well, if for some reason you're doing Void Staff first item, I don't know why you would, but looking at Viego's base stats here, Sork Shoes does more damage. Like, Sork Shoes' unique passive of 18 Magic Pen is better than Void Staff's unique Magic Pen. Here, right, as a result of this. But then as champions gain armor and MR, here's 12-19 stuff. Here is, this is, it's in the title, okay? Against Viego, this is the math pre-patch, this is the math post-patch. Reading my own documents would be useful, I assume. Okay, so in 12-19, right, Sork was better by 2% in the early game. That's still true. At level 18, it was a 4% damage loss to go Sork Shoes. Now it's a 6% damage loss. Like, in a world where you're like, I have all these components and I can either finish a Void Staff or finish Sork Shoes. This is your comparison pre-patch, your comparison post-patch, and the difference between Sork Shoes and Void Staff in the late game grows. Okay, that's the actual math. Okay, Sork is more worse than post-patch against Viego. Against Ari, well, she has less MR. In fact, the Sork Shoes unique passive was always better than Void Staff's unique passive in 12.9. However, as MR grows, on every champion, eventually Void Staff's unique passive becomes better than Sork Shoes' unique passive against a 0 rune Ahri. Is 0 rune Ahri realistic? Not really, no, but who cares? This is the way that works out, okay? Now, this might feel weird that, like, basically, yeah, I mean, the point is that, like, Sork Shoes got nerfed, and Void Staff honestly got nerfed by less. Now, I want to point out one thing, though, which is in the early game, right? Like, it's good enough. We're going to move on. Okay. But let's do one more bit of analysis, okay? This is a Void Staff worthiness. Now, what I mean by Void Staff worthiness is, let's say you're building your second item, okay? Let's say you're building your second item. I built my, Leandri's Torment first. I built Everfrost first. Who cares? And I could choose to go Banshee second, or Zonia second, or Void Staff second, or Horizon Focus second. And none of those items got changed, okay? If I buy a Horizon Focus, I do, make up a number, 19% more damage, pre-patch and post-patch. That item gives me 90% more damage. There is no change in the math there whatsoever. If I have an Everfrost increases my damage by 23% pre and post-patch. If I buy Boots of Lucidity, I cast 15% more spell, they do 15% more damage, pre and post-patch. Those items didn't change. But Void Staff, its landscape and its targets. Sorry, its targets and its numbers changed. The landscape are the targets. Its numbers and its targets changed. So Void Staff has moved relative to Horizon Focus, relative to Banshee's Veil, relative to Everfrost, relative to Lucidity Boots. That is worthiness. So I'm choosing level 11 as our example champion, okay? If you're level 11, in the old patch, your MR used to be X, and now it's in the ether, 38, right? Right? Because, again, champions gained 0.8 MR growth, something like that, right? And I'm rounding here a little bit, but, like, who cares? It's close enough to, like, if this is going to be the math, it's going to be fine. So if your MR was 30, now it's 38. Void Staff used to give you a 12% damage amp. Now it gives you a 12% damage amp, but we're rounding the numbers here. You can see that if we, like, add a decimal everywhere, it's like, okay, it gave an 11.6 damage amp. Now it gives a 12.4% damage amp because 30 MR became 38 MR and 45 pen became 40 pen, but that ends up being a slightly better item overall. And so Void Staff actually got buffed as a rush item, kind of. This is technically true. If your Magicka's pre-patch was 40, which, to be clear, like, actually what's really clear, actually, it's like 30 like doesn't exist. Like, this should actually be like 35 in actual practice, because being level 11 means you've leveled up 10 times, and that was actually your MR. So, doing something a little bit more intelligent here, put this back as a percent. 30.13%, right? Like, 100.13%. So technically at 40 MR, here's where you are, right? But against every other target in the game, Void Staff has been nerfed, right? So if we're a tank with, a Force of Nature, if we're just, if we're literally just like level 11 with Merc Treads, and with a rune, like, this is actually every mage fight ever, right? Where I'm the aggressor, you're a champion, you exist. You're Ahri, you had to build Merc Treads because you're afraid of me. You ran a rune shard because of course you did. You hit level 11, your MR is 30, your MR is 70 pre-patch, your MR is 78 post-patch, and I'm gonna buy my second item. Well, in my choices, where I could have gone Banshee's Veil, I could have gone Horizon Focus, I could have maybe gone Death Cap, or I could have gone Void Staff. Well, Horizon Focus and Death Cap and Banshee's Veil didn't get changed. They do the same thing. Void Staff provides 1.2% less damage than before. And so, hey, there's gonna be a tank out there. Xin Zhao's gonna build Merc Treads and a Maw of Mortius. It may still be correct to build Void Staff, but it's correct by 3% less than before, right? The damage amp of Void Staff instead of being a 36% damage amp, is a 31% damage amp. And this is by the way, and this people need to freaking know this because people don't know how this game works apparently. Okay, I have talked to a professional mid laner with like 8 years of experience playing professional mid lane who said verbatim, if Xin Zhao builds a Hex Drinker against me, I deal 0 damage. So I want to point out that a really, really, really stacked Xin Zhao is going to be like 110 MR, right? Base stats goes up to like 50. Merc Treads gives him another 25. Extra gives him another 25 or 30. Like, let's say he's at 100 something MR, right? Your Void Staff unique passive gave you a 31% damage amp. Now, that's good. I want to be clear about that. That's an item worth buying. But losing out on a 30% damage amp is not ideal 0 damage when your item comparison could be like a Shadow Flame. I'm not saying it was correct to build Shadow Flame, but like let's compare Shadow Flame to Void Staff pre-patch, right? Void Staff's unique passive gives you 30% more damage. Shadow Flame gave you 40 more ability power, which is some number, and let's pick up a number, 10% more damage from the Magic Pen. Maybe it's 8%, who cares? But that's not 0 damage. That's, I trade out a 30% amp for a like 17% amp. We're making up numbers again. I mean, that's not like, that's meaningful. You should build Void Staff if that's your only target, sure. But like, we're comparing Shadow Flame to Void Staff against 110 MR. If your item choice was Void Staff for a 31% damage amp for the unique passive, or Lichbane for more ability power, more ability haste, more move speed, and a Lichbane passive, that probably provides you, right, the 5 extra AP, the 15 extra haste, the 5% move speed, and the Lichbane pop. Those might be worth 30% more damage. Right? Like, Lichbane second, right? And a professional player said, oh, if I don't build Void Staff, I do 0 damage. This is not supported by any math at all in the game ever. You're an 8-year veteran. What the hell are you doing? Anyway, what this means is y'all should be building fewer Void Staffs. Because Lichbane, let's say Lichbane at that point in time is a 30% damage amp. Well, Void Staff was a 31% damage amp, so you built Void Staff. But now Void Staff is a 28% damage amp, so you build Lichbane. Okay? That's what this comes down to, okay? That like, okay, yes, technically pre and post patch, Void Staff is a better option against squishies. But no one cares because why the hell would you spend 1,000 gold on a unique passive that reads deal 14% more damage? That's really bad. That is a really, really, really bad choice for 1,000 gold. That is truly horrible. You should definitely not do that. It's trash. That's horrible. Don't do that. It's bad. Okay. And then we have the level 18 version. Okay, we're fully scaling. We're looking at, right, because this is basically like the buy Void Staff second situation, right? You get your Mythic on around level 9, 8, something around there. Buy your second item around level 11. It's why I chose it, by the way. I chose level 11 as +8 because I want to do the Void Staff second comparison, and it's pretty trash when you consider that against low MR targets, right? Void Staff got buffed, but you know, against low MR targets, Sork is better than Void Staff, which means Shadow Flame is better than Void Staff, right? So there's not a world where you should consider Void Staff second more common than before. If you're tank busting, sometimes it's still correct. Hey, 30% damage amp is a really good damage amp, probably buy it. But like, it still doesn't beat Flat Pen against squishies, and it doesn't beat generic damage against mid-level targets. It really only beats other items against big tanks. So please, please let this be the time where you stop building this item so damn early. Because at the end of the day, the worthiness is the stat that matters. And Void Staff's unique passive is a 14 to 37% damage amp. Okay? Or if you're, people have higher MR as level 18, it is a 15 to 37% damage amp. Okay? That's only worth buying when it's in the 30-something section of the damage amp. Otherwise, get a different unique passive. That is hopefully the right amount of time to spend on Void Staff. It is a situation that I care about quite a lot. Let's hope we've got on this page. Let's move on. Okay, Void Staff worthiness. And this analysis basically applies to Lord Dominic's. It applies to Blighting Jewel. It applies to Last Whisper. Worth pointing out, Cyrilda's Grudge did not get changed, so Cyrilda's Grudge is strictly buffed. I am not arguing against Cyrilda's Grudge. I am arguing against Void Staff. I'm also going to argue against Lord Dominic's, by the way, because Lord Dominic's, again, is in a very similar boat where, right, targets have more armor than before. Again, I'm not repeating this analysis, but it's just, again, worth pointing out that the item got objectively weaker, right? It lost 5% off its amp. And by the way, these numbers look awfully close. These numbers look awfully close to that 10% durability gain here that Champions got. And so we're really not getting a whole lot out of the Lord Dominic's buff. Last Whisper got nerfed. Similar situation going on here. And then we look at the fact that, hey, by the way, Duskblade got nerfed as well. So here's Duskblade against Darius as an example. Here's Duskblade against Ahri as an example. And yep, lethality got nerfed by 3 to 10%. In the early game, lethality did not get changed very much. Early game lethality is barely weaker, if at all. Again, early lethality is mostly fine. But I'm using Duskblade, the 18 lethality from Duskblade as the option here. I'm not actually like comparing the entire item of Duskblade because that's not relevant. But lethality as a stat got nerfed. That is true. And it got nerfed by about as much as the percent arm pen items got nerfed. Which means flat AD, flat AP, and ability haste are the stats you should actually buy more of now. Generic damage is the core, okay? Generic damage is the core build. Horizon Focus is a good item. So here's Last Whisper versus 18 lethality with Darius as our target. This was this comparison in 12.9. Here's a comparison again in 12.10. It is worth noting that, again, if you're like, well, it's quite close that the nerfs between these items, because lethality got nerfed by systems changes, Last Whisper got nerfed because the item got nerfed, these are actually pretty close together. So Last Whisper versus 18 lethality, which one gives you a bigger damage amp? The unique passive on Last Whisper, the unique passive on Duskblade. And again, it's pretty close if you're looking as Darius as your option. It, again, got slightly weaker post-patch, but not by much. And then here is Ahri as your example target. Last Whisper never beats 18 lethality because Ahri never reaches, high enough armor for it to matter. So the numbers, again, are pretty close together. Still, they are a bit lower in 12.10. Last Whisper gained on Duskblade's unique passive. I'm not debating otherwise, but is still a better damage amp against squishies. So next up, we have a change to Demonic Embrace. So Demonic Embrace lost 0.2% damage on melee and 0.2% damage on ranged. So here's Demonic Embrace on a melee champion. As a melee champion, right? So I'm buying it on Shyvana, I'm buying it on Zac, I'm buying it on who cares. And my target is a generic melee champion, aka Darius or Viego, or a generic ranged champion, aka Ahri. Because keep in mind, ranged champions have less health than melee champions innately, and so plus 70 means more on Ahri than it means on Darius. And of course, you can't buy Demonic in the first 5 levels, we can kind of delete this out. But if you're going to go to Demonic first item, and yet, by the way, if I am playing Shyvana or Zac or whatever, my Demonic Embrace burn, despite being directly nerfed, does 2% more damage before armor and MR than other items. So my choice between Demonic Embrace and, I don't know, Lichbane, I don't know, Death Cap, whatever, Demonic gained 2% in that race. That's pretty good. Now, it's not a ton, but the burn is 2% more valuable than before. And if I'm using it as a generic damage item, where I'm hitting ranged champions like Ahri and Ezreal and whatever, which is not its ideal use case, but it still exists, well, Demonic got improved by 4 to 5%. Demonic becomes kind of an even better generic damage option, because everyone's health went up, and percentage-wise, really meaningfully on someone like Ahri or Ezreal. So it's a 4% damage amp. Like, that's pretty good, right? So now if I'm comparing, right, Demonic Embrace versus Lichbane versus Void Staff in a lot of reasonable scenarios, well, Demonic Embrace gained 3%, Void Staff lost 3%, and everything else remained pretty neutral, right? We're going to make different choices here. I think Demonic Embrace in the previous patch, 12.9 and earlier, was, I think, the single most under-purchased item in the game. And I thought Void Staff was the single most over-purchased item in the game. People are, I think, receiving their shocks enough to realize, oh, we should correct behavior. And I'll be really, really clear. So yes, the math did change, right? Like Void Staff did get weaker against most targets. Demonic did get stronger against most targets. This is objectively true. However, the amount of change we're going to see in player behavior is going to be far, far larger than the difference in power of these actual items. That we're going to see a very big shift toward Demonic on melee and off of Void Staff overall. And that already needed to happen, is the case going to make. Now, however, it's worth pointing out that Demonic Embrace, right, a 0.2% nerf here, right, 1.2 becoming 1.0 is a very substantial nerf to the item, because 2 becoming 1.8 is a 10% nerf, 1.2 becoming 1 is a 20% nerf. And so if we look here, Demonic Embrace on a ranged champion is actually much, 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 much worse. So the idea of going Demonic on range is going to go down. So these champions lost Demonic to the tune of about 5% damage. They lost Void Staff to the tune of 4% damage. And so ranged champions, they can keep the Leanders. Leander's got directly buffed, so Leander's going to go up. Leander's to the moon. That's going to be pretty solid. It's, Leander's is like 15%, well, it cannot really 15% more damage. The percent health part of Leander's is 50% more damage, but the rest of the burn has an AP ratio and a flat value, but still that part of the item still does 50% more damage. So Leander's is good. But range shape is going to move more toward generic. And again, Shadow Flame got nerfs, Sork Shoes got nerfs, whatnot, but cooldown boots kept the same. Horizon Focus stayed the same. Lichbane stayed the same. Banshee stayed the same. Death Cap stayed the same. Like, we should be seeing a lot of third item Death Cap, because pretty much all of the generic second damage items have pretty healthy amounts of AP. Like, Void Staff has very, very little ability power, but Horizon Focus has quite a lot, and Lichbane is quite a lot. And it kind of allows you to say, oh, okay, there's a bigger base here for my death cap to be good. And so I think we'll see a lot more death cap overall as that. I did not end up doing the numbers here. There ended up being follow-up buffs to things like Moonstone anyway. Death Dance healing went down a little bit. Divine Thunder healing went down a little bit. Right, this ends up being, again, compensation for directly the armor MR growth changes, so 10% less, about where we are here, more like 15%. Divine Thunder's overall healing down because health went down pretty substantially. I mean, this was, down by about 20%, right, is pretty meaningful. Keep in mind, they have 15% more health, and I have 0 to 10% more durability from armor MR. A 20% nerf on Divine Thunderer is just flat, right? Like, that's just, we scroll all the way back up to this, and any healing that is based off your health and my armor MR got buffed by 13 to 28%. And so Divine Thunderer is actually a better late game option now than it was before, and a worse early game option than before, because again, the armor changes making that all valuable. One thing that I thought was going to happen is I thought champions were going to run out of mana more often, because champions die more slowly. Marksmen don't because they just auto attack you anyway. But like, if I have to cast, instead of 3 spell rotations, 4 spell rotations, because your durability went up by 30%, I might not have mana for the last one. But we go from 1 mana per second. We go from half of 0.75 to 1 mana per second times 45%, which is still an increase in the healing, which I find kind of interesting. But obviously a direct increase in the amount of mana overall. Elixir of Wrath down by 20%. Now, again, keep in mind that counts both your and my armor. So it like, straight vamp didn't go anywhere, except that I live longer because I have more health, and so I can drain tank for longer. It's worth pointing out, though, in again, our Jax versus Jax mirror, like, let's say you have 15% extra vamp and I have 50% extra damage. These are the same stat, right? So you can buy a Vamp Scepter, I can buy a BF Sword. We're doing the same things to each other, right? Back in the 3 BF Swords versus 4 Giant Spell situation, and we're equal, your Vamp Scepter is equal to my pickaxe. Your Vamp Scepter got nerfed. My pickaxe didn't. And so, unless you were making the case that champions are getting bursted out and couldn't heal, it is a direct nerf to the overall amount of healing in the game, which again seems to be the intent here. But any healing that was based off the enemy's armor and magic resist was already going to be flat, except that it's getting, aside from Grievous Wounds changes, which again are relevant, just getting directly nerfed here. Fimbulwinter, less shielding overall. Again, it's going to be change agnostic here. Gore Drinker, less healing overall, which again is based off of my health and my armor. So it's actually 28% amp, right? Because how much health am I missing? I can gain more health that way, and all my health multiplied against my armor and MR. So really, really big deal there. And so the healing goes down by pretty solid 20%. But I want to point out here that by the end game, your durability is up by more than 20%. Like if we look at, I don't know, Darius's Gordon example, if we're over here, his durability is up by 23%, the healing's only down by 20%, he's going to feel pretty good. Now, there's an extra case to be made here, which is that, well, Gordon gives raw health, which means the percentage value of more health is lower. He's going to build a death stance or something, which means the percentage value of the extra armor is going to be lower, right? Those are all pretty interesting. Okay. Knight's Vow, less self-healing, sure, okay. Locket Shield going down yet again, okay, right? So all these things are moving down in all these cases. Okay, wonderful. Conditioning, I want to point out that as far as I can tell, conditioning is not actually total armor and MR. I play conditioning a lot, unless I got bug fixed at some point and I missed it. Unless the tooltips are really, 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 really weird, conditioning actually only gives % bonus armor and MR. Like I play conditioning on marksman because that's good, and I trigger conditioning and I gain 8 armor and 8 MR plus 0 because it doesn't amplify my base armor and MR. So what's interesting is the value of baseline 8 armor and MR is actually lower. Like this, I want to be clear, this rune does not need a nerf. No, okay, the rune is actually OP, but if your goal is systems changes, this rune does not need a nerf. Because here's how the actual math works out. Well, okay, here's the interesting thing. So the actual way to get 8% more durable through armor is to gain 8% of total plus 8. Basically, take whatever your total armor MR is, in parentheses, add 100 to it, and then multiply that by 8%. That is how you get 8% more durability. If you do not have those things in equal magnitude, if the flat is higher than percent, or the percent's higher than the flat, you are disproportionately, not going to be okay, you're disproportionately helping squishier or tankier champions. If you do not add a flat amount that is equal to the percent amount gained, you will help tankier versus squishier more. This is true. Trust me on this one. So conditioning gives 8 flat armor and MR, and it multiplies your built armor and MR by 4% or 5%. Now, what's interesting is because everyone gained armor and MR, conditioning got directly nerfed. That's it. Conditioning never multiplied your base stats. As far as I can tell, anyway, unless the tooltips are really freaking weird in game, but I hover over my stuff and it's like plus 8 armor, that's it. So conditioning already got nerfed because the appetite for armor and MR went down a little bit because everyone has more armor and MR. It is still going to be very, very good on marksman and other squishies who like kind of want some extra durability to play their game out. Because imagine this, right? Imagine not having to go for a Banshee's Veil or a Zonia's because you're durable enough to just get to build a damage item. That's the kind of lever that conditioning has, where it's like, well, no, I have to go stopwatch because I can't win in teamfights otherwise. Like, well, what if you want conditioning overgrowth and then built a Shadow Flame? It's way more damage than Zonia's and any other runes you could pick, and you're gonna live through a lot more teamfights than you would have otherwise. Like, if that's enough, now there's gonna be some teamfights where it's like, no, I literally must go Zonia's because reasons, and like there can be good reason to buy Zonia's or Banshee's or whatever. But like the idea of just picking conditioning overgrowth and then grabbing other stuff, that actually works. So Omnivamp healing on Conqueror went down. Cool. Yep. Nerfed by 1/9 or this is actually 8%. This actually got like really, really nerfed on range. They like really, really nerfed Conqueror on range. This is not a bug on the tooltip. So really, really substantial nerf there to Conqueror on range. Font of Life, again, a little bit less. Of course, yes, your max life did go up by 15%. So by the way, this getting nerfed by 10% means Font of Life is actually doing more healing than before. Now, Font of Life, I think it was a very underpicked rune and could be buffed. I think that's fine. But keep in mind that it's multiplied off your health and your teammates' armor and MR, so Font of Life got very directly buffed. Grasp the Undying is based off of your opponent's health and went down by 15%. And it's multiplied by your armor and MR, which, by the way, 25%. So Grasp of the Undying got buffed. Guardian. Shield went down by 1/9 on at least the health scaling. The flat value went down by about 10%. AP value also went down, which interesting. This one's actually quite a bit more flat. Nullifying Orb, I think, again, shields are balance agnostic because you don't use the entire shield anyway. Worth noting here that I actually feel like, I don't know. Again, it's somewhat balance agnostic. We can kind of move on. Overheal is actually buffed in terms of maximum shield size. And we can kind of move on from there. Barrier nerfed by about 10%. Heal nerfed by about 10%. Again, Ignite going down the same as everything else. And Smite is going to heal for less as well. Mountain Drake is going to give you less value. The shield is down by 10%. Ocean Drake healing down by about 10%, or actually about 20% on the stacks. Then the overall healing down by about 20% as well. That's obviously going to be felt quite a bit. But again, this is part of the systemic healing cut. It's durability and a healing cut with Grievous Wounds going down. Baron Nashor going to be overall scarier to the tune of about 20%. Okay. Nothing too impactful here. Turrets do about 20% more damage, so keep in mind that health is up by 15% in the early game, more like 28% in the late game. How is his damage going? Well, it's up 10% in the early game, right? 1-5 becomes 1-6-7, so 10% more damage, which means turrets kill you less quickly. And then the late game, 278, we're at what? We need like 120 more, which is, I think, actually a pretty substantial damage increase. This is more like a, 30% damage amp, 40% damage amp, if my numbers are correct. So turrets are less lethal at level 1 and more lethal at full stack. So late game turrets are more lethal, at least as far as this one's concerned. This is also a 40% increase, right? 300 becoming 420 is 120, which is 40% of 300. Again, 10% amp to 40% damage amp. Early game turrets, less lethal. Late game turrets, much more lethal. This is a very, very, very large change. This matters a lot. So keep that in mind. Nexus turrets, again, similar boat here. Misco follow-ups, not huge stuff here, so we're going to move on. Alrighty. Well, we are only 1 hour into the full-length patch rundown. Let's talk about the TLDR version in hopefully about 5 minutes. So, there were a bunch of mid-patch buffs to champions who did too well or too poorly. Let's talk about 12.10. So overall, we'll start with this one. Overall, champions gained about 15% more health and about 0 to 10% more durability through armor and MR. 0 at level 1, 10% at level 18, which combines to a roughly 15 to 28% durability increase in champions. Okay, so champions take 15 to 28% more damage incoming before they will die. Shields were nerfed by a relatively similar amount to basically nerf them against the armor and MR gains. It's roughly flat, not a big deal. However, healing, vamp, and Grievous Wounds all just got nerfed. So healing and vamp got nerfed by more than just simply the armor MR growth. They got directly nerfed by 10 to 28%. Grievous Wounds got nerfed by 25 to 10% based on which items you're using and your targets and whatnot. But ultimately, there is overall less potent healing in the game, and Grievous Wounds is weaker, meaning you are less likely to buy Grievous Wounds against moderate healing, only against large healing. Okay, that's the overall sort of lens for that one. So let's talk what's going on here. Again, everyone's gaining 70 to about 300 health by the end of the game. Everyone's gaining 0 to 20 armor and 0 to 16 MR, roughly is that math. And because this is a 10% durability amp, by the end game, shields 10% lower. Okay, great. But healing is cut by a lot more than that. Again, the goal is to actually cut healing in the game, not as compensation to base stats, but to actually cut healing in the game, while also cutting Grievous Wounds down a little bit to make it less of a potent counter, while still keeping out a 50% reduce, which is not too bad. And there's some other items that got changed as a result. Okay, so there were a bunch of individual changes commensurate with the healing changes. We're not covering those. We're just going to kind of move on from there. Okay, so again, Grievous Wounds got cut, and we can show really quick, flashing warning. We can show the sort of difference in durability, okay? So what this means is, because champions got 0 to 10% more durability from armor and MR, your healing cut into them, well, it's not really 3%, it's more like 33% because, like, the math works out that way, trust me. But yeah, the value of an Oblivion Orb or an Executioner's Calling or Bramble Vest went down by about a quarter to 20%. The value of a Hectic's Putrefier or a Thornmail or all those similar items went down more like 14 to 8%, especially by the end game when people gain a lot more armor and MR and you kind of cut the heavy lifting back in. So Big Grievous didn't get changed by that much, so it still did go down. especially considering that also the healing that people are actually receiving is also going down, you are much, much, much less likely to buy this item. We're going to see a lot less Grievous Wounds in the game, a lot fewer purchases, because that would be correct. So buy this item less is the TLDR. Buy Healing Cut less is the TLDR. Okay? Void Staff got nerfed by 5%, Blinding Shield by 2%, Lord Dominus by 5%, and Lesser Breath by 2%. TLDR is the same as up there. Though Armor and MR went up in the game, ultimately, you should be buying Void Staff and Lord Dominic's less than before. Now, Cyrildas did not get nerfed. Cyrildas should still be bought. Black Cleaver should still be bought. That's all wonderful. But Void Staff and Co. all got nerfed. Lord Dominic's got nerfed in actual practice in the game. And things like Sork Shoes and the flat pen off of Rocket Belt and Lethality also all got nerfed. I want to point out, by the way, that Lethality and Percent Pen all got nerfed at actually relatively similar amounts. Like the magnitude of nerfs, because people got more armor and MR and these items went down in value, is actually all pretty similar. And what this means is you should be buying more generic damage items. Horizon Focus, Death Cap, Lichbane, Phantom Dancer, those things are all going to do really, really well for you and are still really worth considering. Also, items like Kraken Slayer that does true damage gets to bypass one of those two balance levels. It gets to bypass the bonus armor and MR that champions got. And so it got directly buffed in the way that Cyrildas got directly buffed because people have more armor and MR, Black Cleaver, etc. So those items actually doing a lot better. Demonic Embrace. The TLDR on the math is, for a melee wielder, it is actually stronger than before. Though the item got nerfed, health got buffed by more, and is generally a stronger item. For ranged users, it's not even close. This item is much, much, much worse. We weren't seeing a lot of Demonic Embrace in ranged champions anyway, but you should see a lot less of it now. The item got pretty substantially nerfed. And again, with all these cases, these items all got changed and whatnot, but ultimately, I think in a lot of cases, they're of a relatively similar power level, and so I'm not going to do too much to consider this. Conditioning got nerfed twice this patch. If people have more baseline armor and MR, the 8 flat armor, MR, and conditioning is less valuable, so it got an indirect nerf there in the way that Sork Shoes got an indirect nerf, right? Same math there, basically. But the total armor MR increase, the amplification here, also does not multiply your base stats. It only amplifies things that you buy. And so there's really, it's just a worse rune. Now, this rune is still very, very good. I want to point out, by the way, that conditioning, the way the math works out, conditioning is a better squishy rune than a tank rune. Okay, conditioning is a better rune on squishies than it is on tanks. So conditioning is very, very, very good on frail mages and frail marksmen who don't want to have to go buy armor and MR because it really, really slows down their item path. Conditioning is best on them. So do that. The same is, by the way, also true for Overgrowth, which has a flat amount of health on it, and then eventually a percentage health amp, which just makes everything higher. Overgrowth is also a better squishy rune than tank rune. So another good option to go for. Keep that in mind. Conqueror nerf, Font of Life, when accounting for the changes, is actually buffed. Grasp, when accounting for the changes, is actually buffed. Guardian is pretty neutral. Nullifying Orb, pretty neutral. Overheal, actually buffed. Area is neutral. Taste of Blood, I think, is relatively tame as well. Triumph, I believe, also actually buffed in terms of value on that one. So keep that one in mind as well. All right, and that's pretty much it for the patch rundown. These are all just sort of, very, very minor tweaks that just keep up with everything else going on in the patch. I guess there's one more thing that's actually really relevant. These are all these same like 10, 20% nerfs that just like keep things kind of at parity. The big change is here. The TLDR is that turrets are less lethal early on and more lethal late game, substantially so. Okay, right. This finishes scaling at 1330 on all of these turrets, right? These maybe this is a typo, and the inhibitor turrets next turret scale later on in the game. I actually think that's true. So this is actually, I think these numbers are a lie. But the point still stands that I think this is still the appropriate scaling at 1330. That this only does 10% more damage early game, but you have 15% more health early game. So a turret will kill you more slowly at level 1. However, this is a 40% damage amp, which is not the amount of durability champions actually gained. Champions gained like maximally 30% more durability. So turrets are much, much more lethal when fully scaled. I didn't identify the exact break-even point because charting game time against champion level changes by role and is awkward in the first place, so I'm not going to do that. But that is still the TLDR on turret changes, so keep that one in mind as well. Overall, hope you enjoyed the patch rundown. Thanks for watching. See you next time.